What would you do if your talent led you to challenge a goddess? Arachne, a young weaver of celestial skill, dared to provoke Athena herself. In a duel of looms, mortality would confront divinity, and daring would confront wisdom. In the city of Hippapa, in the ancient region of Lydia, lived an exceptional young woman named Arachne. She was the daughter of the widower Idmon, a merchant and craftsman specializing in the trade of the valuable purple of Phocis. From an early age, her hands had demonstrated an innate gift for weaving, creating intricate, jaw-dropping designs. Arachne's fabrics were true works of art, so perfect that they seemed to have come from the very looms of the muses. Each stitch was a brushstroke of color that came to life under her nimble fingers. Arachne's fame spread quickly throughout Lydia and beyond. Weavers from far and wide flocked to watch her creations, marveling at the skill with which she mastered the art of weaving. Even the most experienced craftsmen bowed before her unparalleled talent. Praise and admiration were constant, but Arachne was not overwhelmed. Instead, she received them with a proud smile, convinced that her skill deserved such recognition. Her talent was such that it was even said that Athena herself, goddess of wisdom and weaving, had bestowed this gift upon her. However, Arachne did not attribute her skill to the gods, but to her effort and dedication. Her fellow weavers frowned at such claims, warning in whispers of the young woman's dangerous arrogance. But Arachne disdained their concerns, convinced that no divine power could match her earthly skill. One day, an old woman entered her workshop while Arachne was working at her loom. The woman silently watched the threads dancing under the weaver's hands, her wrinkled face impassive. Arachne hardly paid her any attention, too intent on her work. "Your talent is truly remarkable, young Arachne," said the old woman after a while. "But be careful not to offend the gods with your arrogance." Arachne looked up, her eyes sparkling with defiance. Who was this stranger to dare question her skill? "Do you think I should fear Athena?" she replied disdainfully. "My skills far surpass hers. I would accept a weaving challenge against the goddess herself without hesitation." At that moment, the old woman stood upright and her form changed, revealing the radiant figure of Athena. Her golden hair waved as if caressed by a heavenly breeze, and her eyes shone with divine power. Arachne, horrified, fell to her knees in the presence of the divinity, her arrogance crumbling like a house of cards. Arachne's heart pounded, her chest heaving with the mixture of fear and awe that Athena's presence had awakened in her. The goddess, imposing in her beauty, watched her with inscrutable eyes from the heights of her divine form. "So, you think you can surpass me in the art of weaving, mortal?" Athena's voice rang clear and implacable, shaking the foundations of the workshop. "You will pay dearly for your arrogance." Arachne, still on her knees, summoned all her courage to respond. "If I have offended the goddess of weaving, I am very sorry, but I have not lied about my abilities." Her voice trembled slightly at first. "I accept the challenge you impose upon me, Athena. May our deeds be judged fairly." The day of the competition had arrived. Arachne's workshop was transformed into a coliseum of art, where the threads would be the weapons and the looms the shields. The crowd gathered, eager to witness this historic confrontation between a mortal and a goddess. The goddess's lips curved into a slight smile, almost a grimace. With a wave of her hand, she brought forth two enormous looms of exquisite workmanship, each ready for the opponents to shape their art. Arachne gawked at the magnificence of the looms. She had never worked with tools of such caliber before, but her confidence in her talent did not waver. After all, the best craftsmen could create wonders with even the humblest instruments. Athena sat in front of one of the looms, and her fingers began dancing over the threads with unearthly grace. Arachne mimicked her, trying to push away thoughts of impending humiliation if she lost to a goddess. The hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of the weaving combs as they passed through the warp. Vibrantly colored threads intertwined to form increasingly complex designs on the frames. It was Athena who spoke first, her words cutting through the air like blades. "Tell me, Arachne, on what does a mere mortal base his arrogance? Do you believe you can match the mastery of a goddess?" Arachne kept her gaze fixed on her work as she answered, her hands never pausing. "The arrogance of mortals is temporary, just like our lives, but the talent that divinity bestows upon us can last forever if we cultivate it with devotion." A brief silence followed her words before Athena laughed softly, almost disdainfully. Bold words for someone about to witness her insignificance. The challenge had been sealed with that brief exchange. There was no turning back now. Arachne could now only concentrate on weaving the most extraordinary work she had ever created, pouring all her artist's soul into it, even if the cost of failure was incalculable. The hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of the combs as they passed through the warp. Vibrantly colored threads danced between Athena's and Arachne's fingers, weaving themselves into ever more intricate designs on the huge frames. Arachne worked with feverish concentration, letting her skills flow freely. Every stitch, every nuance of color was carefully thought out to create a work worthy of challenging a goddess. Her forehead pearly with sweat and her hands reddened with effort were witnesses to the devotion she poured into her work. On the canvas that was taking shape under his skillful hands, he depicted scenes that portrayed the most shameful outbursts of the gods of Olympus. There was Aphrodite, goddess of love, trapped in a net by the choleric Hephaestus. Beyond, Apollo relentlessly pursued the wretched nymph, Daphne. Arachne spared no scathing details exposing the arrogance and foibles of the deities. For her part, Athena wove with supernatural grace, as if the threads obeyed her subtlest desires. Her tapestry exalted the power and majesty of the immortals, depicting glorious scenes of divine triumphs. Zeus hurled his thunderbolts against the daring race of giants, Athena herself emerging fully armed from her father's head. Each image was a hymn to the supremacy of the Olympians. Hours turned into days, and yet neither showed any sign of flagging or exhaustion. It was as if the very essence of the challenge nourished them, pushing them always a little further. At one point, as Arachne quickly switched shuttles to continue a complicated design, she couldn't contain her curiosity. "Tell me, Athena, why do you bother to accept this duel?" The young woman's eyes met the goddess in a brief moment. "Are you afraid that a mere mortal can match you?" Athena's lilting laughter echoed in the workshop. "To fear such an insignificant creature? No, Arachne. I accept this challenge to teach you the place you must occupy." Her gaze hardened. "Mortals always forget their limits. You will be an example of what happens to those who dare to defy the gods." Arachne held Athena's defiant gaze for a moment before turning her attention back to her work. The goddess's words had ignited a small flame of rebellion within her. Now, more than ever, she was determined to leave her pride as an artist embodied in every stitch, every exquisitely crafted detail. If she was to suffer punishment, let it at least be for the greatest work ever woven by a mortal. The duel of looms continued without truce or quarter. Athena and Arachne worked tirelessly, each pouring all their mastery and passion into the creation of their works. The threads intertwined with dizzying speed, forming patterns and scenes that seemed to come to life under their fingers. With each stitch, Arachne felt a part of her soul being captured on canvas. Each choice of color, each bold stroke, was an act of silent rebellion against the arrogance of the gods. Her tapestry unfolded in a vibrant and provocative aesthetic, openly challenging the glorification of divinity that Athena represented in her work. Both women watched each other from the corner of their eyes, assessing the other's progress with intense gazes. Neither seemed willing to give an inch of ground. Finally, after what seemed like eons, the great canvases were finished. Athena and Arachne retired from their looms, exhausted but satisfied with the result of their hard work. Athena gazed with a frown at Arachne's bold tapestry. Her eyes sparkled with barely contained fury as she watched how the young mortal girl had dared to ridicule the gods. "Your work is undoubtedly technically flawless," the goddess admitted, "but you have made a grave mistake in mocking the immortals like that." Arachne raised her head, defying Athena's wrath. "My creation simply manifests the truth about the arrogance of the gods," she replied without hesitation. "If that offends them, it is their fault, not mine." Athena's jaw visibly tightened and her hands clenched tightly around the frame of her tapestry. "Insolent mortal! How dare you judge the Olympians? You have committed an unforgivable sacrilege." With a sharp gesture, Athena tore Arachne's tapestry to shreds, reducing the intricate designs that the young woman had so painstakingly created. Then, wielding the loom's shuttle, she struck Arachne on the head with force. The impact caused Arachne to fall to her knees, dazed with pain. She brought a trembling hand to her forehead, feeling the blood running down her face. She looked up at Athena, her eyes radiating fear and defiance. "How dare you ruin my work?" she exclaimed. "This is not over. I can still surpass you." But Athena was unmoved by Arachne's plea. Her divine wrath had reached its peak, and she was determined to punish the young woman for her audacity. "You have betrayed the gift that was bestowed upon you, mortal," she sentenced. "Therefore your punishment will be that you spend the rest of your days weaving without rest, trapped forever in your own spider's web." Arachne's eyes widened in horror as she understood the extent of Athena's punishment. But before she could plead for mercy, the goddess raised a hand, and a silvery thread emerged from Arachne's fingers, slowly wrapping around her. The young weaver struggled in desperation but soon felt her body transform. Her arms lengthened and her fingers tapered, becoming long legs. Her torso shrank, and a rounded abdomen appeared in its place. Arachne had been metamorphosed into a spider. Athena watched with satisfaction as the proud Arachne writhed, trapped in her new form. With a wave of her hand, she caused a sturdy web of threads to appear, into which the newly transformed spider began to move instinctively, weaving an intricate web. "Weave for eternity, Arachne," said Athena. "Let your art be a perpetual example of mortal arrogance and the supremacy of the gods." Arachne let out a high-pitched shriek, but her voice was no longer that of a human but the shrill sound of an arachnid. Condemned to weave without rest, the ancient weaver sank into despair, aware that her punishment would be eternal. Athena looked sternly at the newly transformed spider, before disappearing in a divine radiance, leaving Arachne alone in her grim new fate. Doomed to spend the rest of her days weaving tirelessly, Arachne plunged into despair. Trapped in her new arachnid form, she writhed among the threads of her web, bitterly regretting her inordinate pride and the punishment imposed by Athena. As the days turned into weeks and then years, Arachne gradually learned to accept her fate. Her nimble legs continued to weave intricate designs relentlessly, her instinct as an artist flowing through her new nature. Although she was no longer human, the gift she had been given was still alive within her. This video was created for Labyrinth of Crete. Thank you for joining us once again in a fascinating story. See you in the next one.